Hey, deserving listeners, Love is Blind. Let's watch.
Figuring things out, but then like he leaves and he was like, I'm gonna go continue to spend time with my friends. And like, I'm the one that's not ready for marriage. Last night, he texted me at like 3 a.m, saying that he was gonna stay at his apartment and that we can hopefully figure things out tomorrow.
Have you heard from him?
No, not since that.
All right, so this is the beginning of episode 10. They're starting off with an interview with Lauren. Looks like in the morning-ish, and it doesn't look like things have improved between her and Dave. And I doubt things are going to work out for various reasons. And it's hard to know what's going on with Dave. My top hypotheses involve the things I've talked about. There are others. Obviously, he could be faking his questions when in reality he knows maybe from the very beginning in the pods that he wasn't going to be with her. I just can't really tell. We can usually never tell with that, and we just have to be content with not knowing. But, food for thought for our own lives, I suppose, or our own dating experiences maybe.
Texted him this morning and it was green, so I assumed his phone was off. I love him and I want to figure this relationship out with him. I'm emotional because I've never felt like this and I've never wanted this to work with someone.
It's hard to watch on this show when there are seemingly protracted breakups where it seems, at least in retrospect, but maybe even in the moment, that someone is stringing it along too long, that they should have broken up earlier or never even got involved or engaged in the first place. And that's really easy for us to say. The average breakup process takes way longer than what happens in this show. It's just one of those things. People can have a protracted breakup because they're unsure and there's a lot at stake. And I'm guessing a lot of you, if not every one of you, have been in that situation where you are wondering if you should break up, and you're pretty sure, and maybe all your friends and family that you talk to privately are saying, yeah, you should break up, but you're not really ready to pull the trigger. That's not a great metaphor to use. You're not really ready to commit to that because you're just not sure. And there's a lot at stake, right? You could really hurt someone's feelings, which is another reason why people will delay, because they care and they don't want to hurt someone's feelings. Now, there comes a point when it's not helping the dumpee, the person that you're dumping, to wait, right? Because it could be considered self-serving because you're just trying to avoid your own discomfort or guilt or something while the other person suffers in this delusion of a relationship. So there's that. There's also just complete lack of self-awareness that people can have. There's various reasons. And so I think that it's tempting to, at least I have a temptation to look at Dave and go like, what is wrong with you? But, I think this is headed for breakup. And on average, it's typical, if not in all likelihood quicker, just by the nature of the show, right? You have to commit at some point because you go to the altar.
I wanted this to work with someone to this capacity, at this level. I feel like we can get there.
It's interesting. I would not have thought that she would think that, but I think it's normal to have some residual hope and optimism based on the entirety of their relationship, which includes the pods. And there was a lot of reason to be optimistic on some level, but doesn't look optimistic from our point of view. And again, that's normal, even if you're in a situation that looks very much like it's very likely that the person is going to break up with you. It's normal to hold on to hope. There's also a possibility that she knows that it is in all likelihood going to end soon, either from his end or hers or both. But she's just saying that she feels like it's possible because she thinks that she would be better off to say that just in case Dave is up for it, or she's better off saying it because then the show will continue or something. I don't know. I'm trying to think if any of the cast members seem like the type that would just be on the show for clout, and I can't know. But Brittany, for example, last season, Brittany and Leo, it was plausible given the way that she even just presented in the pods, the way she talked, the things that she said. And also when we found out later that she allegedly had a boyfriend the whole time and did not go on the show legitimately and went to Miami with Leo without the intent of trying to see if they could get married or something. And then you look at her Instagram and I don't know, just the way she presents herself, I think it is plausible. I don't prefer to have those strongly adhered to hypotheses, but we all understand that's a possibility. And there's a possibility that people can do both. Some people can both want clout and possibly find a person. I don't know if this is accurate, but from my memory, the very first season, Lauren is a person that a lot of people like, including myself. In fact, there's a possibility that Lauren, in the very first season, might be the most liked person overall on the show. And from my memory, she set out to actually, this wasn't explicit about coming on the show, but at the very least, she capitalized on her fame to boost her online presence for content and being an influencer, which is fine. I mean, in a lot of ways, that's basically what my career is. Don't quote me on any of that. I'm just saying that you can have a commendable person. And anyway, so I none of them really seem that way to me if I think about each of the individuals. So I'm just trying to figure out why she would be optimistic other than she's just holding on for hope.
Have you here and hard to not have you come back.
Mm-hmm.
But we've talked about different ways of problem solving stuff, and it's fine that we have different approaches to that. This conversation is more telling for me than how we want to problem solve in the moment.
I will say it is notable that Lauren seems to see the situation accurately, at least in the way that I see it personally. She seems to understand that Dave's protest or hang-up is silly and weird, and has actually approached the situation in a very hopeful, logical way by bringing in her friends to vouch for her, to give data. If Dave's listening to his friends, bring in her friends. She has tried to help him to be in her shoes by providing some analogies well, you flirted just before. It's not the same thing, but it's in a similar vein. And yet she doesn't seem to be up in arms about it, right? You would think that she would be past her limit of flexibility and reasonableness, and she seems really quite reasonable. And one of the possibilities is that she's just a differentiated person and doesn't take it personally and is able to regulate her emotions enough to try to accomplish something, and she knows inside that eventually there is a breaking point, and all that could be true. There's another possibility, going back to an initial extremely tentative hypothesis that there might be something about Lauren and her trauma history and her role in her family that actually lends itself to matching with someone like Dave, particularly in the pods, because in the pods he presented it a particular way, the way he would neg people and the way he would insult people and his vibe. Now, he very quickly transitioned, once the first initial dates were completed, into a style of communication that I thought was either fine, average, but maybe even above average in his listening ability and asking questions and exhibiting care. I know that might shock some people, but I did see that. I'll even say it right now. He sits down and he asks, "How'd you sleep?" And then she starts to lightly talk about her experience, and he's listening, and we'll see what he says here. But we've definitely seen worse communication on this show in a scenario like this, for sure. And maybe because this season we don't have one of those individuals, at least in the way that we do in previous seasons, so it makes Dave look a lot worse. And I'm not saying Dave is some wonderful catch. I think there's a lot of reasons, given even just his own background that he's presented, that would make him someone to at least date for a long period of time before you decided to commit, right? Because he has said that he has very little experience with this. There seems to be something going on in his family, or he has a complete distorted view of his family. Either way, there's something worth playing itself out over time to see what's going on there. Anyway, and we've yet to see his family. I don't know if you caught that. There was a little title that said they're 2 weeks from the wedding, which I think that means that they're 2 or 3 weeks back from the getaway. I'm not sure. Anyway, so it does raise this question as to what is it about Lauren, if it is a if it's an undifferentiated place that she's coming from, meaning that she downplays her own needs or feels that it's normal to be with someone that mistreats her. There's a possibility there, but maybe we'll get some more data.
Yeah.
What'd you guys do?
I just went and got like drinks with my friend we were at Nolo's for a sec. It was fun.
Good.
It was very hard though. Like it was very hard to like even enjoy anything.
Yeah.
So that it was tough, but.
Yeah.
Okay. So Davis, what do I say? There's a lot of possibilities as to what's happening, and so I feel like I'm reading into a lot of things that he's saying, which is ridiculous. But he says, "Oh, I met up with my friend for a sec," seemingly downplaying how long he might have been out with his friend, and then he says it was fun. Just saying, yeah, it was fun, whatever. And he's like, "Oh, well, actually, it was really hard because this is a very hard situation." What is true there, what's not, can both be true. Yeah, people can process. There's a possibility Dave just needed a break or that he wanted to talk about it. I think that they are headed for breaking up, and it's possible that we'll never know what the deal is. And if that happens, which I'm quite sure it will, then I guess that is up to Dave's next partner, whoever Dave decides to date long term. They are going to be faced with all of these questions that I suppose we all have.
Sorry, what bar did you guys say that you were going to? Or that you went to last night?
That I went to?
Yeah.
I was at Nolo's
Yep.
for a little bit, and then we went to basement bar.
And then ran into some pod people.
Mm-hmm. They were all there, yeah.
Oh my God.
Or like, I don't know who was all there.
Yeah.
Okay, interesting. Lauren is investigating exactly where he went last night, which at first I'm thinking, why? It doesn't really matter. Or is there something being revealed about Lauren's personality there, or was there some suspicion? And then it sounds like Lauren knows, which is why she asked, that he didn't just go to the original place and also went somewhere else, and knows that Dave ran into other pod people, meaning other cast members, right? And oh boy, so did he run into Molly? And how would Lauren know? Some rumor, right? Or some sort of post. Well, it wouldn't be a post, right? Because they're on an NDA not to post that kind of stuff. So I guess it would be, in all likelihood, rumor that Lauren heard from someone. Then we have to ask ourselves, well, why would Dave leave that out? If he's talking about last night, and then he says it's fun, and then Lauren wasn't, yeah. People deal with emotional difficulties, whether it's this kind of situation of not knowing what to do or you're struggling or something in various ways. There's this notion that somehow if you go out and have fun, then it means that you're callous and you don't care about the situation. Like let's say that you are, like there's a missing person. You're one of your family members has gone missing and you're extremely distraught about that. And as a matter of just your regular life or as a way to distract yourself or whatever, even maybe some pathological reaction to avoidance or something, you end up going out with your friends and there's a picture of you having a good time. Does that mean you're some kind of psychopath or that you don't care or that for some people, they'll even think, well, it must be you that murdered them and buried them and, that kind of stuff. Like if you think about certain allegations about Casey Anthony and these kind of folks, I think Jodi Arias also had similar kinds of questions around. And for them, it's a different scenario. But the assumption for anyone, anyway, the optics aren't great. And if Dave was on the up and up, he would just sit down and say, hey, by the way, I had a couple of drinks and then some of the pod guys reached out to me. I went. It was probably not a good idea because there were other pod people there and Molly was there. I don't know if Molly was there. And to be honest, I was only there for a little bit. It felt weird because you weren't there. And, but I don't know. There's a possibility that Dave just doesn't get it, which I don't know how to square that with everything. Well, what I'll say is, let's watch and see. But there's a possibility that Dave doesn't understand because he's never had that modeled to him. He's never had empathy or care or consideration of other people's feelings modeled to him, which is another thing that I'll add to the hypothesis that I have. And there's very little evidence of this, but of underfunctioning or underfunctioning / immaturity. Not that he's a child, but that there's a lack of experience and an assumption of a lack of competence, and also the assumption that they aren't responsible. This is something I haven't talked about yet in this series, but one of the cons to having the underfunctioning, incompetent schema role in life is that you actually do not think of yourself as your brother's keeper, so to speak. You don't think that you actually can impact other people negatively. And that is bizarre for many of us, but for people that are in this category, they don't necessarily know that they have this, but some do, but usually they don't. Basically, when we are very young, 0 to whatever age we want to say, 15 or 12 or something, we do not want those people of that age to feel responsible for their parents' feelings. Within reason, right? If a 7-year-old were to, key their dad's car, I don't know why that popped in my head, and the dad got upset, we would want the kid to feel responsible for that, right? We don't want the kid to be ashamed, but we would want the kid to say, oh, I just bothered my dad in some way, or I hurt his feelings. Or, maybe a more common thing would be to just call your parents a name when you're 10 and you are having a bit of a meltdown. And later on, the parent says in a calm way that what you said yesterday hurt my feelings and I'd like an apology. Can we hope that the 10-year-old would feel bad, not ashamed, but bad, and have enough care to say, oh, I'm sorry, I said that I didn't mean it or something, within reason. 10 years old, it's a lot to expect, but some care, right? Some empathy and some care for their parents' feelings. But in terms of being ultimately responsible, the way that you would feel if you were at the same level, we definitely do not want kids to be concerned. For example, if my wife were going through a stressful experience and she wasn't even telling me, I would be expecting of myself, and I think, depending on your relationship, I think a lot of people would expect me to keep an eye out, right? And to care, even if she initially is trying to do things on her own independently, right? I should be like, hey, how's it going? And if she's like, I'm fine, I'd be like, well, are you sure? So that's me caring in a way that is noticing, and I consider myself responsible to some extent. If I just went along my merry way and just was waiting for her to ask me for help or to very explicitly demand that I care for her or something like that, then I would consider myself to be a bad partner. There's a lot of complication here, but I hope you get the difference that there's a different way in which children will feel responsible for their parents' feelings, whereas, in a spousal relationship, you will feel responsible for your partner's feelings. That's right. It's a lot of nuance here. And of course, we're not ultimately responsible because each person is responsible to some extent for their own issues, right? But anyway, you get my point, I hope. And so for underfunctioners, they are kept at that childish point of view their entire life. They could be 65 years old and still have that 7-year-old mentality when it comes to feeling responsible. They feel responsible, but not nearly as much as what they are expected and what they should feel responsible, in that they know that they can really, as another example, I don't have this really prepared in my mind, so I hope this is making sense. But when, say, for example, a 4-year-old doesn't want to, go down for bed because it's bedtime, and like, say your 4-year-old is a little verbal and says like, I hate you. I want to stay up and watch Fantasy Island. That was me when I was a kid. At Saturday night, I wanted to watch Fantasy Island, and it was on at 9 o'clock, and it was a bit racy of a show, and so I couldn't watch it. It was after Love Boat. I'm surprised that I was even allowed to watch Love Boat on Saturday night. Anyway, Gen X issues. And so let's say you have a kid that is, I hate you at 4. And the next day, I imagine most of us would not expect the 4-year-old to immediately wake up and say, oh my God, I'm so sorry I said that, or even address it at all. And us as parents would recognize, kids have meltdowns, especially this particular kid will say stuff like that. And I don't take it personally because, they're having a meltdown. I don't think they actually hate me. They're just, they're in a bad mood, they're blood sugar or whatever. And they're going through a transition where they're trying to adjust to a new schedule, or whatever, and hopefully we have enough differentiation and maturity to say, I'm not going to take that personally. Whereas if your spouse in a meltdown says, I hate you, we take it personally, right? Well, children have a sense of that if they were to do something along those lines, that they can't really devastate their parents the way that other people might be able. Now, the child isn't aware of this yet, but once we graduate to that level, even if we're now 15 or 25, we understand that even our parents, we can devastate. One, because there's a shifting of the authority, right? As we age, typically parents will consider us to have some wisdom or power or their own maturity to be able to evaluate whether or not someone should be hated or not. You know what I mean? Whereas a 4-year-old, we would understand, especially in a context like that this isn't a rational evaluation of your value as a human being if a 4-year-old says they hate you because they don't want to go down to bed. Now, I'm guessing a lot of you are thinking, my kid doesn't say I hate you, but I hope you get my point. You can be a perfectly good parent and have a 4-year-old that says that they hate you when they're having a meltdown. It's fine. Anyway, so for these individuals, because of the way that they were treated and the schema that they have, the belief system that they inherently believe in their bones as to their responsibility for other people's feelings, they just do not seem to care. They have the capacity to care in the same way that a 7-year-old has the capacity to care, but they have not matured, partially due to themselves, but also because of the system that they're in. They've never been allowed to do that. They've never been shown that they have that personal power. And so when you interact with people like this, it can be really weird because they're not psychopathic in that they're not trying to hurt you. They're not trying to scam you. They seem to have feelings and they seem to have remorse under some circumstances, and they seem to have care about human beings. And yet, when push comes to shove, you will be shoved out of the way in the similar way that a psychopath or someone with antisocial personality, or what the internet would call a sociopath, the way that they will treat people. If you get in their way, they will step on you to move forward in the same way that a 4-year-old who wants to stay up and watch Fantasy Island will say, I hate you, because they're trying to step on the parent so they can watch Fantasy Island, because they just don't know that they can hurt other people's feelings. They haven't gotten to that point yet. And they also are having a hard time with their emotional regulation. And so you can have adults. So I want to add that to the possibility that for Dave, there's very little indication of this. There's little indication of anything, but just as a jumping off point, because I don't often get a chance to talk about this, that the technical language that, if you wanted to Google it, I suppose, is dependent personality or dependent personality disorder. There's also a subcategory called passive-aggressive personality disorder. There's also another term that we use, underfunctioning, these kinds of words, or a schema, meaning a scheme, an internal schema of incompetence. All these things are kind of in the same category. Or the target of a codependent person, codependent meaning overfunctioning. I don't know if the internet is a good resource about this, but in terms of the clinical literature, like the books, many of the books behind me are actually, clinical texts. Those are the terms, or I guess research literature or something. Anyway, and I say all this because these are well understood phenomena that people have been, in my field, have been observing in others for over 100 years. So I'm not making this up, and it's not some obscure idea. It's a nuance that I've anecdotally found that many therapists have not been exposed to. But when you are exposed to it, it's very particular, and it can be very easily confused for lack of empathy in general and psychopathy. So I'll just add that to the picture. What do you think?
I don't want to throw everyone on the spot, but Yemi was like, "Yeah, Molly's here. Do you want to go meet her?" And I was just like, "No, absolutely not. That would be the dumbest thing ever to even say hi. That would just be stupid."
Especially too in the state that you were in last night.
All right. So he is saying that people offered to introduce him to Molly, and he says that would be stupid. I'm curious as to how he would elaborate on that. Is he saying it's stupid because it would hurt Lauren? Or is he saying it's stupid because it would have bad optics? Because you could see, given the scenario, Dave seeing either or both or something else. And a lot of, at least my take on the situation hinges on that, but we didn't hear more.
The thing I think about the most when I'm thinking about meeting them for the first time is I know they're going to talk to us and want to ask us about why can't you just move on from this whole situation.
Mm-hmm.
I've been thinking about that, how I'm going to answer that, and I have no idea.
Let's workshop.
Okay, that's interesting. To me, he says they're talking about her parents, and he's saying, I'm hesitant to meet up with your parents because I know that they're going to grill me about the indecision that I have about what we've already been talking about. And I've been trying to think how I would respond to them, and I actually have no idea. Now, I'm guessing what he is basically saying is that he's not confident he's going to be able to convince them. But there's another possibility that he just actually is completely in the dark on the whole topic, because that is the way that he is presenting. He's like, well, yeah, Lauren, I hear you, and I want to believe you. And especially after talking to her friends, he was saying, there's a lot of believability to this. But, I have these other friends. And again, I can't know, but it is completely consistent with the hypothesis of an underfunctioner and someone with a schema of incompetence and someone who has at least some type of dependent or passive-aggressive personality. I'm trying to think if there's passive aggression, maybe, but there's more evidence of just general passive-aggressive personality disorder. And listen to all my deep dives on both dependent and passive-aggressive. The personality disorder is no longer in the DSM, but it was for a time considered akin to dependent personality disorder or a subset, and I'd go into detail on that. But anyway, the point is that for this personality disorder, which people often don't even know about, I know clinicians that have forgotten that they were exposed to that in graduate school. Dependent personality disorder is a fairly common, you hear about the biggies. You hear about antisocial or psychopathy. You hear about borderline or narcissistic personality disorder, but you don't hear about dependent. And there's a fair, I can't remember the prevalence, but it's close to the others. It should be talked about as much, and it can be just as annoying and just as problematic for sure. It basically results in the individual having a distortion of perception that they are irresponsible and or incompetent, and that they absolutely need other people to tell them what to do. and that they cannot affect other people in the way that other adults can affect other adults. They don't consider themselves responsible, not because they're trying to avoid it, but they actually don't, in their bones, understand that their actions can harm other people in the ways that we would want adults to understand, right? They have a childish, I was talking earlier, they have a childish understanding of their effect on other people. And so they'll be nice, they'll be kind in a lot of ways. Sometimes they can be really, really nice and really, really kind. And they'll seem like, to some people, they might look like the nicest, most empathetic people on the planet. And yet they have this black hole of empathy that just doesn't even exist yet because they're like a child and they do not understand how they can hurt other people. So I don't know about Dave, but someone that presents like Dave in my office, and if I had more information, it would absolutely fit everything that he is doing. So just to really demonstrate this, I'm not saying this about Dave because I can't know. There's all these other possibilities as to why Dave is doing all this. He could just have some incision. We don't know what he's been hearing from his friends. It could be more convincing, and he's actually not even putting it out there because he doesn't know he should, or he wants to even protect Lauren because there's more damning data and he doesn't want to throw under the bus, or he's just fairly avoidant or whatever. There's a lot of other possibilities. But if it is the dependent hypothesis that we go with, then there's a possibility that throughout all this, and now included, that he is waiting for someone powerful or a consensus to tell him what to do because he just knows deep down in these kinds of situations. There's a potential version of dependent in which they feel very competent and act in a very competent way in certain domains, like at work. But when it comes to anything involving relationships or even particularly romantic, the whole integrity thing, he never went into detail as to what he was referring to. And I think it has something to do with these scenarios, maybe a more broader term, but it could be something quite focused on these kinds of relationships. Anyway, so for someone like Dave in this scenario, they will just be waiting for someone to tell them what to do, and they don't even have the foundation to even ask the question, well, what do I want? One, so they have a hard time knowing what they want. Two, they have a really hard time understanding that they are in the driver's seat and they need to make a decision. I don't know if I gave this analogy, but an analogy regarding how children, because we want children to be dependent, right? We want children to depend. We want children to not be independent in the ways that adults are. We don't want a 5-year-old walking out the door and saying, see, I'm looking for an apartment. We also want children not to have to worry about other people's feelings as much as they will later, because we want them to focus on themselves. Also, it can be overwhelming to them, and we want them to, be more narcissistic or self-centered. We want them to have empathy for peers, right? We don't want them to just take and take and take, but we don't want them to lie awake at night and worry about politics and about the family finances or their parents' marriage or whether or not they're going to make it into college. We do not want young children to be even aware sometimes of those issues. It's just too much, right? Well, for those children, for those human beings who are very young, they just don't, when they're treated well enough, they just don't even begin to ask the question as to whether or not they are harming other people. They're just waiting for people to tell them what to do because that's usually what works out. And how would they even possibly make decisions that are facing the family, right? And so there's a possibility that he is just waiting for someone to tell him what to do, and he doesn't know that he's in the driver's seat, even though he is. He has no way of even beginning to evaluate, and because of mistreatment, he might, even if he were in the driver's seat, he might, this is typical to at least, the main personality disorders, all of them share the feature that due to mistreatment of various kinds, whether it's flat out abuse or neglect, more subtle kinds of neglect emotionally, they were never given a chance to figure out who they are and how they feel and what they need and what they want. And so there's a possibility that even if he did consider himself in the driver's seat, that he doesn't even have the foggiest idea as to what he even wants. And there's some evidence around that, because when he was in the pods, he was seemingly reacting from a place of fear regarding, in his words, what his sister would think, but also what other people wanted about him, right? He was like, well, I don't know if Molly really wants to be with me, and Lauren is really fighting, so I'll go. You could fit it into that, right? That he just doesn't, he's like, well, I'll do what people tell me to do, and I don't even know who I want to be with because I've never thought about that. And he might have operated from that place in the past regarding dating, and it could really be disastrous because he could pick people that, it can be strange being in a relationship with someone like this, because again, they can be very nice and very kind. They can make you feel very powerful or strong. They can make you feel competent, I guess. And if people have a similar kind of trauma, they might seek out people like him because it makes the other partner feel smart and competent and needed. But there's a cost, right? And it can feel very alienating and in a very subtle way, because how is it that someone can be nice and yet and have the capacity for care and empathy, but why am I always walking around feeling like they don't give a shit about me and my feelings? And why do they do certain things that just seem to be so callous? They must be doing it on purpose, is usually the conclusion, but it's not, Anyway, so I hope this is all making sense. I'm not saying anything about Dave, but it's given me a chance to talk about a very common personality disorder, and there's a spectrum, and there's people who wouldn't qualify for the full-blown disorder, but definitely have the schema of incompetence, and there's other schemas as well, like I don't matter as much as other people. There's other ancillary things, or a more specific schema of I cannot make big decisions in this domain on my own. I absolutely need someone to tell me what to do. That's the only place that I feel comfortable, and I resent it. That's another aspect. I hope I'm not going down too much of a rabbit hole, but for dependent people, they were made, so they retain that early childhood dependence, but they resent having never been allowed to, graduate, but they also believe they would screw it up if they did graduate. So they have a real weird complex around doing things on their own. And, you could see someone going on a reality TV show like this, partially so that's interesting now that I think about it. I've talked about passive-aggressive personality and how it's often related to dependent personality. Passive-aggressive personality is not the way that people talk about it typically on the internet, usually. But the long and the short of it, and listen to my deep dive, is that for children that are denied the ability to occasionally get angry within reason, they will submerge their anger, but the anger will come out in other ways, and sometimes in ways that they don't even know they're expressing their anger. They might steal or lie or cheat, or infidelity can be a result of an adult expressing their anger. They have a problem with their partner, and anger meaning not just like the typical stereotypical way of expressing anger, but anger, generally speaking, is a very functional emotion that motivates us to say, hey, I don't like this. One could say that a lot of those, just drawing a boundary or stating I would like this instead of this, is at least in part motivated by anger, sometimes more noticeably than others. And so for these individuals, they have a lot of built up discomfort or preferences that are not being met just as the normal course of a relationship, but also because they don't assert themselves. And so they're secretly extremely angry at everyone in their life, but they also feel completely dependent on their close, attachment figures. So how do they express their anger? Well, they'll do it in a passive or hidden way. Passive aggression can be better termed as hidden hostility or hidden anger, or hidden assertiveness is another term you could say. And it comes out in very dysfunctional ways. It's not functional to cheat on your spouse as a way of communicating that you would like them to listen to you or draw your feelings out more. That's not a functional way to communicate or assert yourself. So there's another possibility that for him, he even went on the pods as a passive aggression against his sister. I mean, he clearly was busted up about it. He was, crying. Oh my God, my sister. Now he can be distorted about his sister. It's possible. Who knows? But at the very least, there's some evidence there. And also, he could be also being passive aggressive to Lauren in a way, in that he feels hurt or something, jealous in this childish way of like, well, you've had sex with, or you were dating someone recently, and it's a childish, one could say that it's an immature, childish, undifferentiated way of seeing that scenario, right? Most adults would understand that people have dated before, and maybe you're a little irked that it happened so soon because it's just sort of in your head, or there's a little bit of I don't know. I don't know. I see people online saying that they absolutely agree with Dave's take on this or something, and maybe I'm out of step at least with some people. But anyway, certainly there's nothing empirically or factually wrong with what Lauren did, or some kind of noticeable, impossible barrier for him to overcome. Anyway. But it's possible that he is hurt by that. He can't express his anger because, when they talk about it, it's sort of odd how little hostility or little anger comes from him. And I'm not saying he's supposed to be like angry, but the way he talks, it just feels so passive, right? And yet the effect is, one could say, hostile, in that it is telling Lauren, you did something wrong. You have harmed me, or you're the incompetent one, or you don't make decisions well, or you don't have integrity, or you're a slut, or whatever the message that a lot of us are seeing or reading between the lines and saying, what the hell? Well, this could be a hidden or passive way of communicating one's anger. And it could even be a way of communicating anger, not even towards Lauren, but which will happen, that for passive and dependent people, they will have a buildup of various different angers that are happening in that month, but also a lifetime of angers that they've never been able to express. And so if you get close to them, you'll start getting some of that, and it'll feel really bad. People talk about being around someone with full-blown, untreated, pre-awareness narcissistic personality or borderline personality. The exact same pain and aggravation and confusion and demoralization and horribleness can absolutely happen when you're involved with someone who has dependent personality. But it's even worse because people with dependent personality, they seem really nice usually. And they also seem like the sort of person that you want to take care of, because they often give off this vibe that they're incompetent and they need other, and they often will appreciate other people's help. They'll call, oh, you're so good at this, thank you. So, because they just don't believe that they're competent. So it's a much more confusing swirl of experiences that is just confusing in and of itself, but also people don't talk about it online. So I just want to put it out there because I have no idea about these two, but it might be something that you can talk about with your therapist if this rings a bell. Either direction. I actually know some of you who have, maybe not who are watching right now, but some of the listeners to the podcast or watchers to this channel will say, actually, that's me. I have, at least, I'm on the spectrum of dependent or passive-aggressive personality because of this, this, and this. So, using those awarenesses and going deeper with your individual therapy can, be helpful.
Like, I'm obviously in this experience with you because I, want to be with you, and I see this ending with you regardless. I think the easy answer would be we just want to be together. I'm speaking for both of us. I just want to be with you.
Yeah. That's exactly how I'm feeling.
Same.
Did you have me standing?
That's exactly how I'm feeling. Although this could be one of the situations where one or both of them are saying the sorts of things that you're supposed to say. Like, I want to see this through to the end with you. It was sort of those phrases. And they either know or they aren't aware that what they're really communicating is they just want to continue being on the show. Not in a callous way, but they aren't ready to make a decision, and they're also not committing in this moment. And they actually don't really believe that they're going to be a yes at the altar. All right, well, if you like what we're doing here, one of the main ways you can really support what we're doing is by becoming a member on our YouTube channel by clicking the join button below. If you don't see one of those join buttons, there's a link in the description of the episode, I believe. You can also become a patron or an upper tier patron and or an upper tier member. That is a really great way to support what we're doing here, but only if you care to. And everyone out there, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.